Today I want to talk about 3 keys that will help make your backlit paintings more successful. Today we are taking a look at backlit paintings. And by backlit paintings, I mean paintings where the viewer is looking into the sunlight. You can see in this painting here, the trees, the mountains are all dark because the sun is behind them. They're being backlit, so they're dark, and that's a backlit painting. And there's 3 things to remember about a backlit painting. And they're somewhat simplistic. I mean, they kind of a little obvious, but if you're not thinking about these 3 things, it's easy to get caught up in the detail or the minutia and lose the big picture that you're after, and that is to suggest the light being in front of the viewer. So number 1 is all verticals are dark and the flat planes are light. So you're going to have everything that's upright. By verticals, I mean upright planes, verticals. Tree trunks, tree foliage, sheer cliffs on these mountains back in here, they're all upright. And they're always going to be dark because the sun is behind them. Now you might have a little rim lighting, like a little bit of yellow lighting hitting the edges on them, but for the most part, it's going to be dark. And the flat plane is going to be light because it's catching most of the sunlight, except where, of course, the tree here is casting a shadow. Obviously, that's going to be in shadow because the tree is casting a shadow. But for the most part, in the sunlight, the vertical will be dark and the flat planes will be light. Of course, that leaves 2 other planes, the sky plane and the slanted plane. You want to force everything in your painting into those 4 planes: vertical, flat, slanted, and sky. And generally, your sky is going to be very, very light. So, because you're looking into the sunlight. So, in this case, John Frost here, early California Impressionist, he makes the sky pretty much just a pale yellow, white and yellow. It's not blue. Could be blue in a backlit painting, but I want to make it a very light, warm blue, like maybe a phthalo blue or cerulean blue instead of ultramarine, or instead of cobalt, because that's a bit warmer. But the sky is very light and warmer. And then the third is strong color temperature contrast. So the light areas are going to be a lot of warm colors. Shadows are going to be cool, like these purple areas on the mountains, the gray, violet tree trunks, all the bluish grays you have in the foliage in here. And you might look at this tree and say, well, this is in shadow, but it's really light yellow, or kind of a darker yellow, orange. And that's true, but he does have a lot of violet scattered around with it. They're yellow leaves or yellow orange leaves. They aren't going to become violet leaves just because they're in the shadow. They're still in the shadow. The difference would be you could see one of these leaves in the sunlight. It would be more like that or more like that. Now this is a lot warmer than that. So you got to have something to compare it to. But I do want even the yellow, orange leaves a little cooler looking than the bright sunlit areas. But there's always that strong contrast of color temperature, warm and cool color. And our warm colors are, yellow, orange, red orange, yellow green, anything with yellow in it on the color wheel is warm. And the same is true with the cool colors. Anything with blue in it is going to be cool. So that's blue, blue violet, blue green, red violet. So that contrast of warm and cool is what's going to give you the suggestion of sunlight and shadow, like this painting does so well here. I mean, there's a lot of vibration because it's got the warm against the cool colors. And that is much more exciting than everything being cool or everything being warm. And that's what you get on a backlit painting. So let's look at some more. I've got some of my paintings at the end. This is a painting by Worthington Whitteridge. He was a Hudson River School painter, mid to late 1800s. Now this painting's a lot thinner. Colors are a bit more naturalistic. John Frost here really pushed the color. He pushed the color temperature mainly is what he pushed to suggest the sunlight and the backlighting. He still has the sun in front. So the sun is still in front somewhere in here, which means trees, tree trunks are going to be in shadow. All this stuff in here is in shadow because the sun is behind. Now there's variations of value change within these shadows. You got your darkest here, then this shadow, and then the value of the trunks, and the value of the leaves, but they all hold together as a dark shape compared to the lighter, warmer yellow leaves or yellow-green leaves in the background. But you can see his paint's much thinner. You can kind of see a little bit texture of the paint, thin, maybe a lot of glazes and scumbles in it, but very nice suggestion of backlighting. A lot of strong contrast in there. Then here's one by Daniel Garber, and you can see the dark trees because the sun is behind. Sun is probably somewhere just out of the picture on the right side. And again, the sun can be on the side in a backlit painting as long as it's in front of the viewer, which this is. And the sun is very much in front. Now, usually you're not going to see the sun dead center or right in the face of the viewer. Only Van Gogh would do that. It's just too much, too overpowering. So usually the sun's off to the side slightly or behind some more dense foliage. But you can see the dark, cool color of the foliage. And even back in here, the upright trees, dark for the most part. Even this, I don't see this tree as being front lit. I still see it kind of coming from the side, but in front of the viewer. And here's the front of the trees. It's in shadow. So simplifying your trees especially to where you have a simple silhouette of dark with a little bit of rim lighting. And that's going to really suggest more of where the sun is and how it's hitting the trees. You can see the lightest lights are the flat plains on top and the real warm sky because, again, you're looking into the sunlight. If you make your sky too blue like this, that works to some degree because it is very light and the tree foliage is really dark. But that sky is just too cool and it just loses the effect of looking sunlit. So the yellow sky really helps. Now you can go in and block in your sky with yellow or yellow-orange or even orange. It's going to be warm. It's going to look like sunlight. And then come back with a real pale, like cerulean, or maybe even ultramarine blue. And that yellow or yellow-orange or orange will keep the sky warm. And the blue will kind of temper it a little bit and give a little sense of that bluishness in the sky. This is a beautiful painting. Now, Daniel Garber used a lot of little tiny brush strokes, which, can make your painting fall apart pretty quick. You see all those just almost little dots and dashes in there. More than I would do because I would just mess it up in detail. But his little small strokes still hold together as big masses. So even though this is very detailed, all that foliage in there, it still holds together as a dark mass against a really light, warm sky. So dark, cool mass against a light, warm sky. It's a beautiful painting. And suggesting that atmosphere by getting the shadows lighter back in the background and continuing to get lighter as they go back. This is Willard Metcalf. And this one, the sun is almost a bit more overhead than backlit, but I think it's still backlit. You can see by the trees, you're still getting mostly shadow on these trees. Even though this looks real light, there is a definite shadow in here in the front of the trees, and the lightest is on the edge, or kind of like rim lighting. And you got the flat plains real light, and the sky really warm. Now here he's got blue, but there's almost kind of a bluish green, which is a lot warmer than just blue. And that warms up the sky a little bit. Here's Hansen Puthoff, early California Impressionist. Again, does a great job of using the value changes in the plains. He's got the vertical trees are dark. And here on the mountain, you got vertical cliffs here, maybe slightly slanted, but they're pretty vertical. And they're going to be dark, and then your really slanted is going to catch some light. And then generally your lightest is your flat plane. Now he doesn't have them the lightest. He has this slanted the lightest, but they're both very light compared to the vertical cliffs and the vertical trees here. And again, the values getting lighter and bluer as they recede shows that atmosphere. So another Hansen Puthoff. And you can see real light, kind of a grayish warm, but it is warm, the sky. And kind of the grayish blue trees of the vertical trees in the background that are dark. But they're far enough away that you're not going to see much except a cool color, because they're in shadow and they're far away. Colors tend to gradually drop out the further back they go. That's why your dark yellow-green way in the distance will turn slightly more bluish green, because yellow starts to fade as it recedes. And then red starts to fade after that, so all you're left with is kind of like blue, like back in here in the very distance. This is a good example of the vertical tree being dark, the foliage, and then the light just get this a bit, just on the tops a little bit, kind of rim lighting. The light filtering through some sky holes, so you have some bright yellow leaves in there, but don't overdo the yellow, the bright light coming through the shadow too much, because then pretty soon it won't be a shadow. It'll be just dappled light and dark all over the tree, and it won't have any form. So you can show some light coming through the trees, but keep it minimal, because then your dark shadow will turn into lit, and you'll have a front lit painting instead of a backlit. This is Sam Hyde Harris, another California Impressionist, early 20th century and mid 20th century. And you can see his focusing on just getting a nice shape or silhouette for these trees. A few sky holes in there, or pulling the edges a little bit to get them slightly softer, and using just a few sky holes to suggest, that they're even trees. Here you have more light, kind of rim lighting on these dark trees. But just looking at those trees by itself, it's backlit. Then the sun really hitting everything in here, and the rooftops. A nice job of that atmosphere that you see in Southern California. Now, of course, this is flat plane and in shadow, but that's because a tree over here is casting a shadow. So another Hansen Puthoff, a bit more involved as far as different colors, some different values, and probably starting with the idea of just designing the shape of these trees with a dark silhouette, maybe picking, this color or that color, and just blocking them all in. So they're upright, they're dark, and you're kind of focused on the shape of them. Then you can add the lights, some different colors within the shadows, different colored lights. But if we look at this at a black and white, it is probably just two values. Well, three with this darker dark right here, but you have the lighter and the darker. Not a lot of different values, but he does use different colors to give it some variation. So you can change the colors, like have several different colors within that one dark value of the trees, and maybe one or two different colors in the lights, but have it the same value. So you end up with 2 to 3 values, but maybe 4 or 5 different colors. So vary the color, but keep the value simple and keep the uprights dark. Another Hanson put off, he did a lot of backlighting. You can see the nice simple shape of these trees. They're actually a little easier. Trees are a little easier to paint on backlit paintings because basically all you have is that silhouette. Maybe a couple of value changes in the shadow and a few sky holes, but really not much else. It's a lot easier to suggest, and you have really strong contrast between the background and the foreground dark because all the trees are in shadow. It becomes harder when you have to distinguish light background with light foliage. But when things are really backlit, you have dark trees, light background. A lot more simple, strong contrast to suggest the backlighting. This is my painting in Flagstaff, Arizona. I used to paint there quite a bit. And here, again, the sun is way up here. You don't see it, but it's somewhere up in there. And I'm just trying to keep everything upright and dark, or keep everything that is upright, keep it dark for the most part. Now, it does have a light edge to it, or maybe a few bigger shapes of light. And it'll vary. You know, the sun can be a lot lower, and there's not much light on the tops at all. Or it could be up a little bit higher, and you get some of these bigger light shapes. But for the most part, the foliage is dark, tree trunks are dark. I'm trying to show a little bit of light edge on the tree trunks and trying to push that temperature. Really cool shadow on the tree trunk, cool colors on the ground. And even the yellow here that's in shadow is cooler than the yellow that's in the sunlight. So this is cad yellow, yellow ochre, probably with a little bit of violet. And the light areas don't have any violet in them, so they're a bit warmer than the yellow shadows. And everything gets more simple as it recedes and goes back. These trees back in here, there are, a lot of lights on the tops, but the trees are mostly that shadow because of the positioning of the sun. And the more simple you can keep things the better. You can always pick where you want some detail. Like I've got a lot of tree trunks in here and detail of the logs on the cabin. But I'm careful to leave everything else, like the mountains, trees, flat light field in the background, keeping them very simple so that they read better. This is a courtyard in Tucson, where again, backlit, got the yellow foliage. This was a cottonwood in the autumn. Tree trunk, very dark. Cottonwoods have real dark tree trunks. And it was easier to get the shape of the tree trunk on there because, it's 90% dark. So I can just block it in a flat dark value, get the drawing of it right, then just come back and add a few lights that I see on there to show the direction of the light. The flat plains, all very light. Sky is the lightest, probably yellow and orange with a little bit of cerulean, kind of real light cerulean, scrubbed in there to make it slightly bluer, but still real warm. And of course, when you have backlit paintings, you're going to have just a lot of strong value contrast as well as color temperature contrast. This is in southern Utah. And here are the foliage, mostly shadow. Again, yellow, orange with a violet added to it. And when I add the violet to the yellow to make the darker shadowed yellow, I have to get that violet the right value first. I can't add a real dark violet to this yellow orange because it's just too dark. So whatever color you're adding to modify a color, local color, make sure it's the same value. And I don't want a violet that's way too light because then it'll make my shadows too light. So get the shadow, get the modifying color the same value as the local color, and then add it to it. And that violet just kind of mutes the yellow, cools it slightly, or yellow-orange. And then the warm yellow, that's just cad yellow and white, really stands out as being sunlit. So that temperature contrast is really helpful here. And also value contrast. Really cool shadows on the ground, bluish green here, a lot of violet in the dirt, a lot of violet and orange in the kind of dead leaves there. And then same thing with the background trees. They're mostly shadow, a little bit of rim lighting. The sun is coming from the right side, left side, but it's still in front of the viewer. So still consider this backlit. It's another one here. This is in Tennessee, Leaper's Fork, Tennessee. And trying to keep all these tree trunks cool. They aren't as dark as the cottonwood tree trunks. I don't know what these are, but they were lighter, still really dark, but a lot of reflected light too, kind of bouncing up. The sunlight down here bounces and kind of warms up some of those areas. So you will have some reflected light. Same thing right in here. The light hits down here and bounces up into part of that overhang there. And keeping the background hills, trees cooler because of the backlighting. Just no need for any detail back in here. Really no detail in the barn either, other than the open doorway there. And trying to push the shadows a bit cooler, I got streaks of blue, kind of really strong bluish green, really strong blue-green in there. I can vary the color, even got a lot of red in there to mute it slightly. And all the foliage is a dark yellow-green with a few light areas hitting it. But it has to read as a dark to work. This is in southern Utah also. Sun was, I don't know, maybe over in here somewhere, but in front of me. And I started with this foliage in here, just the big general shape, and probably had all the foliage about that dark or maybe this dark, kind of a reddish orange, some yellow in it, and then added some lighter because the light was really filtering through the foliage. So this was a little different. I'm not really sure why. Maybe the sun was a bit higher, but there was a lot of light filtering through. Still read, especially the tree trunks, read as a dark, but a lot of filtering light. You can even see from the deer, they're mostly dark. They're upright, mostly dark with a little bit of rim lighting on the edges to suggest where the light is coming from and where it's situated. And same thing here. It's still backlit, but the sun is almost just straight overhead. This was mid-morning, but you can still see it's backlit. Shadows falling this way because the sun is in front. And I blocked the foliage in with the shadow and then came back with some thicker lights and put them on top. But it's that shadow value. Use that to get the overall silhouette of the dark foliage. Same thing in here. Even though the light's pretty much on the side, most of it's in shadow and a little bit of light on the side. And looking for the strong value contrast. And I will overemphasize the shadow sometimes, make more of the tree foliage or tree trunk darker, just to give it that backlit feel. And sometimes we'll push the contrast more, the value contrast and the color temperature contrast. Here's one in Colorado, small painting. Again, the sun is in front, almost straight overhead, but not quite, so that all the trees, I block them in dark as well. All the lights here on the flat plane to suggest what the light's doing, and kind of rim lighting on the mountains here as well, showing where the light is and how it's affecting the shape. It's an older painting, again backlit so that everything upright, the church, the tree trunks, the foliage, they're all dark. They're all casting shadows here with some dappled light. Even the figures here, again, mostly shadow, a little bit of rim lighting. So you can use that shadow to get your flat silhouette of everything. The church, the figures, the horses, the dog, trees and foliage, all set up with the dark. And push it a bit more. If you see too much into the shadows, you're going to ruin your lighting. So simplify all the stuff you're seeing in the shadow so it remains in the shadow. Here's a backlit house. Again, almost overhead, but not quite. These trees are casting shadows on the roof here. And all this is in the shadow because the sun is behind. The bushes here are all shadow with a little bit of light on top to show the direction. Here I'm really pushing the thick paint, even pushing the color to emphasize how warm that color is on top. But learning to simplify what you're looking at so that it reads better is real important. And that can be hard to do because we're used to kind of copying sometimes what we see. But we want to paint what we see, but also what we know, what we're trying to show. This is really simplified. You can see just basic shape with rim lighting on these trees, shadows on the ground, and light. But here you have slanted, which is catching some light, and then the vertical cliffs on the hill, on the mountain there, are in shadow because they're vertical, they're upright. This is not upright, it's slanted. So it's going to catch more sunlight. Not as much as down here, but it'll catch some. And backlighting is also a lot more dramatic. There's always more contrast, dark and light, and more warm and cool contrast. So there's always more drama there than there is on when the light is just straight overhead or behind us. There's just much more going on. So I do like the light in front of me or to the sides a lot better than directly in front of me or directly behind me. See it in Colorado. Again, I can block everything in shadow and come back and just hit the smaller shapes of light to show the light direction. Now this one, it's still in front, but almost overhead. Things are still backlit, pushing the color a lot more, a lot bluer, violet in those trees back in there to really push them in shadow. And when I use real strong color like that, I will always come back and add a little bit of grayish color somewhere in here. Because if all the color in the shadows in the background are all real intense, they're all going to be screaming at you. But a few strokes of a small amount of gray makes that stronger color more effective. So careful not to make everything super bright and intense or too gray. You want a kind of a combination of both to make it read better. This is also in Georgia, and the sun is probably up in here somewhere filtering through. So some of the light filters through the foliage and it warms up that shadow. It's still a lot cooler here than it is here. So I still have a lot of temperature contrast, but it gets warmer because the light's filtering through the leaves. And I wanted to show that also. I could probably cool this off just a little bit. Still be sunlit, but slightly cooler to make it recede and go back a bit more. Hopefully that was helpful in understanding what to think about when you're painting a backlit subject. See you next time.